In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. Go ye therefore into all the world and preach the gospel. Jesus spoke, saying, I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life. Taking the light to the nations. Light of the Southwest.
Well, I'm glad you're with us.
You're going to be glad, too.
I'm Hal, and this is my wife, Tommy. And what are you so excited about?
Well, we have Jim and Penny Caldwell here today, and I know they're one of your favorite guests, but we have the additional honor of having Dr. Lennart Moller with us today, who is on the video clips that Jim and Penny have brought to us, and we get to meet you in person today, Dr. Moller. Thank you for coming.
Let's let them introduce him.
All right.
Well, it is so
Welcome.
great to be here. Thank y'all for having us.
It's wonderful
such
to
a
have
privilege. The show has been fantastic. The responses have been excellent, and the emails are wonderful. We just thank your audience. They are wonderful.
Yeah.
But Penny would go ahead and introduce Dr. Lennart. He is... well, go ahead. I'll give her the...
Well, for one thing, a very, very dear friend.
Amen.
Of most importance there. But Lennart has been on his own study, completely independent of us from the beginning. We did not know one another.
Right.
And through a most amazing series of events and phone calls, we were connected one to another. And he is from the area in Sweden, around Stockholm, and comes from the Karolinska Institute and is a chief scientist and professor there.
Wow.
And his examinations of these Exodus-related events and artifacts and some of these things that are coming out of Saudi Arabia, he has made some profound connections, and his research in a completely scientific manner of these items has produced some very stunning results. So we are thrilled to have him here as well. It's always so good to have time to
But
visit with
everything
him.
confirmed what you've been saying.
Yes, and
Mouths of two or three witnesses.
Yes,
these things will be
absolutely.
proclaimed.
We share different experiences. We have lived with Bedouins in the middle of nowhere in Saudi Arabia.
Have you?
That's
And
right.
if you share that experience, you kind of learn to know one another.
Very well.
From a different perspective.
15 days in the desert together, yeah.
But I mean, we work with the same things, but it's very, very different in one way. I mean, it's the same issue, the same locations, and the same events. But you are there to document as kind of, I'd say, kind of Indiana Jones character. I mean, get out in the middle of nowhere, see
Right.
where is it, and I mean, you have done that a number of times.
Yes.
15 times.
Yeah,
Yes.
and I'm doing it in a little bit different way, and that is that I look at it from a scientific point of view, because either the Old Testament is just garbage, and then we shouldn't be concerned about it, just to leave it. But if we assume that is a true historical document, then we should be able to apply science. And that is rather easy, because if we have a list of campsites, or if we have a list of events or whatever, and they are there, and God said to Moses to make some kind of travel log, then you should just go to these places with this travel log, and you should be able to do an experiment to see if it works and if it fits.
Yes.
And that's the way I have approached the whole thing.
Did you hear what Osama bin Laden said last week about why they must destroy Israel? Because they're going to make claim on Saudi Arabia.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
See, they know it.
They
very
know
well.
what you've been telling us.
I didn't hear that because I've been traveling. But you know the Bedouin leader?
Yes.
We stay with, or if you stay with a person, I don't know.
Exactly. we
We
shared
can tell
the
you long
desert.
stories. We leave them out here. But, he said to me at the campfire in the evening that we know that this land, and he was speaking about land of Midian in Saudi Arabia. We know that this land belongs to the Jews, but we do everything we can to prolong their takeover.
Really?
They know. They know.
So he wasn't just whistling Dixie.
No.
They didn't learn anything from the Exodus, though, that when God has a plan, He does it.
Well, what they talk about is that they acknowledge the Old Testament to a great extent, but they modify it into their framework of whatever we should call it. So, I mean, it starts with Isaac. They say it's okay, but it was Ishmael. And so they have a kind of an oral tradition, and they know a lot of things about the Old Testament, but filtered through the Quran.
Sure.
So, I mean, we can talk with them about many things.
Yes, that's true.
For them, it's obvious that the Israelites were on the Saudi Arabian Peninsula, or the Arabian Peninsula during that time. That seems to be in general knowledge among these people.
Isn't it amazing that it wasn't to any of us?
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
In their own history, they claim that Moses and the Israelites came down through Mecca and Medina. In their own history, they acknowledged that they went that far south. And of course, we say they actually went through that area further south into Yemen and Oman and these areas as well, in the wandering in the wilderness. But they acknowledge it, that they were down there.
But there's another culture that is probably more important to understand the whole issue, and that's the Egyptian culture, because everything started there. I mean, if we talk about the Exodus,
Yes.
and how the people came there and so forth, and to go into the Egyptian culture and see if there are any traces of these events, that is a key issue, because if we can establish that, we can say that there is a certain level of understanding that it really has taken place.
Did you have any problems finding evidence in Egypt?
Well, problem can be defined in different ways.
Yes.
It could be political problems,
Oh, yes.
or that you are guarded in different ways. You don't have the freedom to move around, or they don't open up doors, or whatever. That's one type of problem. The other type of problem is to know what to look for. I mean, if you don't know what to look for, it's rather hard to understand, to get in or get inside the doors and start to investigate. But yes, there are a lot of things there. And we can actually, if we can look at the image.
Let me add one thing.
Yeah, okay.
You gave Tommy and me your book yesterday, and I hadn't seen her since then.
Yeah. Maybe it was too heavy for her. She just fell out.
Yeah, there you go.
But the biggest thing about it is she was sharing at breakfast some of the things that I had never even thought about that she got out of your book. So this book is something else, folks.
It really is.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm ready. Let's go.
Yeah. If we look at image 1, just to give some comments. Here we can see the Middle East on this image, and just one comment, far down to the right we can see Ur, and it's claimed that Abraham was born in Ur. But that's not really the whole truth, because he was born in the Ur of the Chaldees.
Yes.
And the Chaldean culture hadn't reached that far down at that time point, and the city, if we follow the biblical chronology, was leveled by the Elamites at the time. Further, Ur should be in the country or the area between the rivers in Mesopotamia, and that is not the case with this location. But if we go further up in the midsection of the image, we have Haran, and that is a known place before they came into Canaan. And just beside that, in today's southern Turkey, we have a city that's called Ur, or Urfa. Interestingly, in the Muslim tradition, they know that Abraham was born there. The first ever mosque was built over the cave where they claim he was born. The Crusaders built a fortress because they know that Abraham was born there. We are very close to Haran, and a lot of villages and places around have the names of the family of Abraham.
Right.
And remember another thing, when Jacob, Isaac, etc. went to their homeland to find a wife, they were not allowed to marry the Canaanites. Where did they go? Up to that area, because that was their homeland.
Yes.
So we can have a lot of I would call it evidence or very strong indicators that Abraham actually was born in today's southern Turkey. And that changes the pattern.
It is.
Totally.
Yeah.
And in that way we can look at things. And If we take number 2, you can see there is a satellite image that covers the hot area. You can see the Sinai Peninsula. In the green to the left, you see the Nile Delta, and we see the Nile River. And to the right, upper right, we have the Dead Sea, and the big sea on top there is the Mediterranean Sea. So here we have a lot of the scenario that takes place in Egypt and so forth. And if we look at number 3, next one, it's an image just showing how they came to Egypt. Because Abraham, we know that he was in Canaan, and then the family, the sons and grandsons, etc., they came finally to Goshen, which is the Nile Delta of Egypt. Just one comment here, I don't want to go into detail with it, but a lot of people believe that the Hebrews spent 400 years in Egypt as slaves. That's not correct.
Really?
That's not correct. It doesn't say that. It says, first it's a prophecy. It means that it's precise concerning content, but not precise concerning time. You know, that's a typical way to do it in the Bible. So it's more important to see the reports later on in the scripture when it deals with the exact times and so on. But I have went through this in the book. We can get all these things together with 480 and 430 and 400 years and a lot of things, and it can be put together. And Paul is even teaching about this. He's setting the time frame from the sacrifice of Isaac to the giving of the law at Mount Sinai. And with that kind of reference, we can put all other things together. And there were much less time in Egypt. Because in the original text, it is outside Mesopotamia, in foreign land. So we have to include the time in Canaan. And that's very important. And if we speak to rabbis, which I do know now and then, that's very interesting, you know. We think that we know things and we talk about it and we discuss it. They know, you know. It's very interesting to have discussions with them. I really enjoy that. And if you ask them, how long time did you spend in Egypt? 220, they say, years. And I believe it's likely around 260. But the thing is that the Bible says it was just 3 generations. Then we can assume how long is a generation. Let's say it's 70. 70 maybe. Times 3 is 210. If we consider it to be 80 or 90 or whatever. I mean, it is not so long. And I have met so many people in theology, priests and pastors and so on, and they're so confused about these years. But it can be fit together. It works. It works.
Wow.
So that's an interesting thing.
Yeah, I thought there were many more generations than that because of the multitude.
That's what I was thinking. Boy, they really got busy, didn't they?
And the other thing then, what we can do is, we can do, just to summarize the number of people. I mean, they had 3 occasions when they counted people down to the family.
Yes.
And then you can make some assumptions. They counted men, that were the same number of women. You can make an assumption of children, an assumption of people above the age of 60. And you can combine these things, and they were roughly 2 million. And then the question is, of course, how can you be 2 million in a certain amount of time? You can do that. If you are within the birth rate we have around Sahara, in the northern part of Africa today, around 4%, you can deal with that. So you can go from 70 people to 2 million within that time frame.
That's what I was sitting here wondering about.
Yeah, and a lot of people ask questions about this. But you should know that if they have a lot of children per family, it's a very strong growth of the family sizes in the end of a period. I mean, it's just multiplying in all directions. And that was the problem for the Egyptians. I mean, that's the reason they wanted to limit the number of children. And that is the background why Moses ended up in the Nile River.
That's right.
But the important thing here is to understand, you know, when we look at slaves, slave workers, we sometimes have the mental image of the concentration camps in Germany. It was so, I mean, they were on the way to die. So when the Allied forces opened up the gates, they could not walk out of the gates. And then we read a text about the slaves, Hebrews in Egypt, and they think about them in the same way. And that is wrong.
It is wrong.
It is wrong. They lived in the delta, 3 harvests per year, free access to water, fish, their own livestock, the best part of the country. Much better than you have here in the U.S. Much, much better. And that's one thing. The other thing, they were forced to do hard work. And if you're standing in clay, stamping it, adding straw, not for 10 minutes, not for an hour, but a full day,
Yeah.
every day, if you combine that type of activity with that type of food, we know that they were bodybuilders.
Oh, yes.
That's the best explanation.
Yes.
I mean, to go to gym 2 hours a week, that's nothing. 10,
Really.
12 hours a day doing this hard work
That's right.
with all the food available. And that is important if you should understand the situation they were living in.
Well, doesn't the scripture say that there was not one feeble among them?
Yeah. I mean, we have
So-
a lot of small words here and there and references to it.
Exactly.
And it said when they were forced to work hard, they greatly increased.
Yes.
Yes.
And one thing, when you have a good situation with a lot of food, you can really multiply because you can feed your children. And that's a very important factor.
Never thought of that before, but
And in the other direction, if you starve, then we know one thing, that is that women cannot conceive.
right.
Because the reproduction cycle is switched off if you are in a starving state. So that's another thing that we can have as a marker. So they were really living in a good condition. We have been in Saqqara, and Saqqara is an interesting place. Saqqara is a place just south of the big pyramids in Cairo. And Saqqara is actually a Hebrew word.
Is it?
And it's Yitzhak or Isaac. And they call themselves to be of the covenant of Isaac or Yitzhak at that time. And we can see this. And if we look at number 5, where we have the name expressed, and it is Saqqara. And it's just, if you take the first part there, it's Sakka. And that is the name of this Egyptian location. And to see if that could be confirmed, I've been looking at different locations. And if we go to the next one, number 6, you will see a kippah from the Krakow ghetto in Poland.
Really?
And there you can see in Polish, Synagoga Itzhaka in Polish. It's the same thing. Some 3,500 years later. They even longer back in time, and still the same expression. Itzhaka or Tzaka. So
Amazing.
the thing is, if we have a Hebrew connection south of the pyramids, where the oral tradition 150 years ago was that Joseph was imprisoned there. If we look there, we'll find the step pyramid, we'll find huge storage places for food, we will find the first time in the Egyptian history where there is a prime minister under the pharaoh. It happens to be the only time in the Egyptian history where they have recorded the 7-year famine. And there are so many things at this location that fits together with the biblical account. So this prime minister under the pharaoh Djoser, he is identical to Joseph in all his characters. From his lifespan to his mission, his duties, and even tax rates. And priests were not included in the tax law, etc., etc. Everything, very, very detailed information is the same.
Same as the biblical account.
Yes. So there we have the Egyptian history and the biblical history that just fits perfect. But no one talks about it.
No one talks about it.
And this is a very hot issue. Because if this is true, it means that the Hebrew, by selling grain brought all the valuable stuff you can think of from the whole area into Egypt.
Not just from the Egyptians, but from all the nations.
We know that Jacob and his family came from Canaan
Yeah,
just because of this reason.
yeah.
You know, this is another biblical proof that the blessing of Abraham was upon those children and Jacob's family, and the great wealth of Egypt was brought in by the Israelites in the beginning.
In the beginning.
It wasn't that they just plundered the Egyptians.
No.
The Egyptians got it on behalf of what they brought in with that blessing that was upon them and upon the family of Abraham. Another absolute biblical proof.
One of the things that Lennart does very well in his book is that he not only discusses this possibility, but his graphing and the charts that he uses in comparison are wonderful. They're easy
really
to
are.
understand and very informative. So if you're trying to explain this to someone else, then you just have his book and you say, look here, and you see these graphs, and it's really powerful.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I mean, that is the way the book has been done. I don't want people to believe me. I mean, I don't care if people believe me, but I have made this into a court case. That's the reason it's called the Exodus case, with the 84 chapters, 450 pages, and 790 color images. So people can see and read themselves. And then I ask in the end of the book, you're the jury, you better come up with a verdict. So I want to have that approach. I don't want to force my understanding of this on or to another person. I want them to really see this themselves. And then I say, read it, compare it with the Bible, go there and see yourself, make your own judgment. But here is a tool you can use to do that.
Right.
Let me add, don't call the bookstore right now for that book. It's out of print, and we're waiting for more to be printed.
Yeah, but there will be, I mean, people can order. There will be soon coming more.
Okay.
It's under printing, so.
Good.
We have an idea what that book's going to... If we sell it by the pound, you can't afford it.
Yeah, if it's by the pound, it's very, very expensive.
It is.
It's those lead pages.
It's not that big, but it is heavy.
Yeah, it's more, I think it's about 2.5 pounds each.
I wouldn't be surprised.
The normal price for it here in the U.S. is around $40 plus shipping, which is about 15, so it's ended up with around 55. Yes, because it's so heavy, it's very expensive to ship.
But it is incredible facts and documentation.
Yes. If you read one chapter per week, it will last for 3 months.
And it'll take you that long to absorb everything that's in it, I think.
Yeah, the thing is that if you go through every detail, and then you compare with the biblical text, you know. I met people doing Bible studies in groups, and they have one chapter per meeting. And if you take away summertime, etc., then the book lasts for 2 years.
Oh, wow.
2 years
Well,
studies.
that's right.
Yeah. So you can really dig here.
You can.
And
the pictures. You were the photographer for
Yes.
most of these pictures, and you are an incredible photographer.
Well, I just document what I see.
Yeah.
And I enjoy when it's beautiful.
It's beautiful.
I mean, so I enjoy photography.
Congratulations on a wonderful book.
Let me just make one comment. When I take a book apart that is concerning this subject, you know, I will put the sticky notes on the page and have a little tab sticking out. And when I first got Lennart's book, I started this process. And then after about 20 or 30 pages, there were so many sticky notes I gave up. So I just used the whole volume as my reference book. Because every page has got some really good meat on it. And so it's so powerful. So you just get an idea of the concept, the pages, the chapters. And then when you think a thought, you can go right to it. So it's better just to memorize where the chapters are. There's so much material here.
But I can also tell you that when I wrote the first edition of the book, I did it, the text part of that first edition, I did it in 2 weeks' time with my 2 index fingers. I mean, like machine gun fire, like that. And, I mean, to be honest, I read some of the text and I was impressed myself. I mean, I learned from what I was writing myself. I felt that this was structured from another source, really.
Wow, you had divine help.
It was, I have written books in science, several books, and I know a book like this would take 1 year or 2 years really to put together. So this has been a very special book.
How many years have you been researching
my whole
Exodus,
life.
though?
Oh, okay, you talk about the Exodus. I've been a scientist my whole life. And just the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm is not just an institute, it's a big university, big medical university. And it's most well known among scientists because we decide about the Nobel Prize in Medicine, the faculty. So that's my character, my identity as a scientist. And this project, can't give a date, but I started around 94, 95 with it. The first edition came out the year 2000, and then there's been several editions, and this is the third extended edition with 40% more material than earlier. It's like a rainfall, you know. I mean, we just talked about new things yesterday, and
yes.
I mean, it's just being added all the time. I don't know where to stop. I mean, it's...
And, you know, judging from the serious weight of the book, we have advised Lennart with the new information that we were discussing at our home actually before we came here. There's going to be a whole nother chapter. And I said, Lennart, stop. Make volume 2.
Yes, please.
Don't add any more to this book. So, but he's right. It continues, and more things continue to be revealed.
You would think that there would be an end to it eventually.
I thought that from the beginning myself. I'll do this and that's it, you know. And that was just the beginning. I don't know where it ends.
Well, when I have shared with people and given the Caldwell's book and video and so on, the general comment is in the Christian neighborhoods that most people live in, this is impossible. It's over there where Constantine's mother said it was at, and so on and so forth. And yet even some of my rabbinical Jewish friends still think it's over on the peninsula.
The Sinai Peninsula.
And I completely agree. And when I see rabbis, which do now and then in different parts of the world, and we have very nice discussions. I mean, it's so nice to talk to them. I really enjoy it, because they have such a good knowledge. But one thing where they don't have a knowledge is physical evidence of their own history. It's mainly the Western Wall. And it seems like when they have been around the globe for 2,000, 2,500 years, they have disconnected to the physical connections, except the core part of Jerusalem. But when I talk to them about, let's say, Mount Sinai, and etc., they don't really have any opinion, you know. They think about it in a more symbolic manner, and it happened, but who knows where it was, and who cares where it was, and we haven't seen it, and, you know, no one really knows. And then it's so interesting to show them, look here, we have a mountain here. And then I show them all the details.
I quote Penny's in the chapter 14, verse 10, that you're going to own from the... Isn't that it?
Oh, the soles of the feet?
Yeah.
Deuteronomy 11:24.
That's
11:24.
From the...
And when you talk, when you say that to a lot of my Jewish friends, they look at you like, but evidently, from what we were talking about earlier, Bin Laden and the rest of them know that they are going to own all the land from the sea to the Lebanon to the Euphrates to the desert. And I don't know why. The only thing I can think, the Jews don't want to stir up any more trouble.
Yeah, and therefore the very common reaction is, let's get rid of them. Drive them out into the Mediterranean Sea or take whatever, just eliminate them. They are a big problem. And whatever we do, they will be a problem. So just let's get rid of them. That's the basic understanding of Israel today. And even worse, that's a kind of common thought among Westerners and in Europe and in the U.S.
It is.
So, but remember, during the 1800s, with Theodor Herzl and these people that started, crazy thoughts about coming back to a nation.
That's right.
After 2,000 years or so. I mean, crazy, really. But it happened. And it just happened like that. I mean,
it did.
Unbelievable. And then if we talk about the future, whatever that will give us and show us, our spontaneous reaction is, okay, political situation is sensitive, no one knows anything, you know, and what would happen here and here. You know. I think something will happen. Israel have had 6 decades in existence, and now we are in the 7th decade. And I think that decade will give something or carry something with it that is different from the first 6 periods. The 7th period is probably going to be a little bit different.
Well, and
Wow.
It's
That's
looking
quite
like
a
it's gonna
statement.
be.
That is quite a statement.
Yeah.
And that's why we believe, all of us together, even coming from different avenues and sort of meeting with this same research, just the way all of it came together is a way that is not a common way. We didn't hear of Lennart and phone him. He didn't hear of us and phone us. The connections that took place are far beyond anything that we could have humanly accomplished on our own.
Yeah.
And what you said about this 7th decade, I think that's highly important, because when you couple that with these truths that are finally being shown outside the realm of northwest Saudi Arabia, but indeed encompassing that whole peninsula, it is highly important, and why we're very grateful to you, Tommy and Al, for having us on here and for letting this information spread round about the globe on GLC.
It's totally our honor.
Well, it's going to change all the Sunday school material about they drowned in the sea of reeds.
Yeah.
In fact, yes.
In knee-deep water.
I have a kind of very strong opinion about this child in the Nile River. I don't think we should teach anything in Sunday school for, small children about this event. It's a terrible thing. It is, we do it into a romantic story. Oh, the little child came down the river and the princess was waiting and everyone was happy and so on. It is, it's like hell. The parents are ordered to kill the children.
Yes.
What did the parents think about for 3 months before they actually put him in a basket? Should we stab him to death? Should we strangle him? Should you strangle him or should I do that? Should we?
Or should we send them to the United States and have them aborted before they ever were born?
Yeah, exactly.
That's our mentality over here.
So, could you imagine the struggle for parents for 3 months?
No,
What did they talk about for breakfast? Should we use a big piece of rock? Should we just drown him? There must have been hell for them.
And not only them, all the other parents.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
That had sons they knew they had to kill.
Absolutely. So when they finally, the parents are a couple of cowards. They don't really dare to kill him themselves.
No.
So they put him in a basket with 2 possible outcomes. He will drown or be eaten up by crocodiles. Should we really tell stories like this to small children? Should we do
I like
that?
the romantic story better.
Me too, Tommy.
Is that we don't face the truth in this country anymore.
No, but we make it into kind of a romantic fairy tale.
Sunday school story.
And the king and the queen were happy all their days, and the children came to them. I think it's terrible. And it's the same thing with Moses, when he's standing on the shore of the Red Sea. And we think about it, it's powerful, and he's lifting his hand or rod, and the water parts, and everyone is happy, and there's worship on the other side, etc. I know for certain that Moses was
Terrified.
suicidal.
Terrified.
Imagine to bring 2 million people from Texas down to Houston and promise that everything will be under control, and you're out somewhere in Galveston area, standing at the beach. You have the Russian army coming up behind, and you have 2 million people to take care of, and you have promised them that everything will be fine, and you're standing there, and you're completely surrounded, have no way to go, and you are the leader of the congregation, you are the pastor. And the Jewish historian Josephus, he's more descriptive at this event compared to the Bible. He says that Moses said something like, let the mountains disappear, or let us fly in the air, or that the water should just disappear. In the Bible, we read that Moses is just crying to the Lord, where he answers, you should be still, and I will fight for you. But this is another story that we make so romantic. But I would like every pastor and priest to imagine the situation of fooling 2 million people out into the middle of nowhere, and the only thing you know is that they will die, and the congregation want to stone you to death.
That's right. We don't think about the utter terror involved.
Yes, and actually, Tommy, when you stand there, and Lennart has now stood with us on the Saudi Arabian side in 2003, standing there and looking at the Gulf of Aqaba, it is a mighty water, exactly as the Scripture has described it in Isaiah. And to stand there and look across to the other side, and we've been on both sides. Lennart has done many expeditions in the Red Sea from the Egyptian side. And to stand there and look and see what a great body of water it is, and the great mountains behind you completely blocking your way. It's a very narrow pass in Wadi Watir coming down to this peninsula in Nuweiba in Egypt. And to be standing there, the terror, the utter terror, just as you described.
It's a dead end.
Absolutely a dead
from
end.
two perspectives. I mean, it's only death as an outcome. But to take another example, how information is hidden that we can't really see, we can't evaluate it because it's not known to us that it exists. If we take a look at, we can look at slide 13, just to show in the way you transport yourself. I mean, this is not an air-conditioned tourist bus. It's something else.
Much better boat than we put our car on and went across an island, though, I would say that.
Yeah. So you have to find your kind of different ways to go to certain places. So in
But
this
it's
case,
not a sailboat.
no, it's a steamer, a small steamer, and we are on the Nile River. And we decided to look for something that you have here in the U.S., but no one knows about it, and no one cares about it, and no one have even thought about taking a deeper look into it. So at the Brooklyn Museum of Art in New York, I mean, that's a fantastic museum. You have all the mummies and, you know, all the things you have from Egypt. It's beautiful, hieroglyphs and everything. But the most important thing in that museum, you can't see, you can't find if you don't really look for it. Then you have to go into kind of a, not hidden, but a kind of a corridor or a part of the museum where you really don't go. And there is a small glass cabinet about this size. And there they have a written note, it's about that big, written by the founder of the museum from Egypt, 1890. And his heading for this little note is the famine stealing. And the text there says that this is something basic we should interpret and read more, and there are some comments, etc., etc. And then he has attached, 1890, about the same size of a photo of this rock and this stone face. And that is what we were aiming for when I showed this steamer. So if we take a look at 14, you see this rock here? And you had to go to the Muslims, the Nubian, the dark-skinned person here. They have a very dark skin color in the south of Egypt. And he is kind of rolling over that area. He called himself to be a mayor, anyhow. So he know about this stone, and this is exactly the one I'm talking about that you find a small image of from 1890 in New York. He calls, as a Muslim, this stone the Joseph stone. On this stone, we have the history of the 7-year famine and all these events, where you can connect this first prime minister to all these events that is described in the Bible. Have you seen any marketing of this?
Not at all.
The most important stone in Egypt.
And where is it?
It's on an island in the Nile River.
Really?
In the south of the Nile. So that's the reason
That's where
we
you're
had
on
to
the
take
boat.
a kind of a little bit different approach to reach that place. I mean, it's nothing you just buy a bus ticket to or so. And you have to look for it. But as you saw, it's a big rock. I mean, it's about the size of a human in height, and it's a long text. And it tells about the tax rates during the preparation for the famine, how much they should tax the people, and the priests were not included in this, exactly as is described in the Bible.
And once again, the leaders of Egypt, as the leaders of Saudi Arabia, Jordan, various of the other countries surrounding current-day Israel, You will never hear from them that there is any evidence. In Egypt, particularly, the gentleman in control of all the archaeological discoveries and digs now, in fact, makes a very strong case always that there were never any Israelites in Egypt. There were never a slave population enslaved under the Pharaoh. They were all Egyptians that honored the Pharaoh. And Lennart has so beautifully covered this in his book.
Yes, he has.
In great, great detail. You can go into the book and find out all of what these steles are saying and how brilliantly they proclaim from the 4,000-year-old stones, that there was an overseer in Egypt. He was preparing for a famine, and the Bible is recording a very historical, accurate, factual event that took place.
But yeah, you use pictures to prove your point instead of what somebody else wrote.
Yeah, exactly. And
That's something else.
you know, if I just say that there is a stone, I mean, people have to believe me or not. But then I capture an image and say, here it is. Look at it. Look at it. And I just say one thing, and that is, if people are interested in this, go to the Brooklyn Museum of Art and try to find this. You have to look for a while, but you can find it there. And you can see the heading of this note from the founder of the museum, the famine stele, the famine rock, or the rock inscription dealing with the famine in Egypt, the 7-year famine. Not just a famine, but the 7-year one.
Yeah.
Once again, biblical history coming to light in a very factual manner in our day.
Yeah.
It's amazing,
It
and
is
that's what's very
amazing.
exciting.
It is amazing.
It is indeed. And if we look at number 15, it is just a short explanation of the name of Moses. If we translate it, I mean, it's an Egyptian name. Mo means water, and Oses, rescued from the water. So if you put that together, Mo-Oses, it means a person dragged out of water or rescued from water. A rather good description
Yes.
of a drowning child in a basket in the Nile River.
Yeah.
So there are many connections. I mean, then that name has been used among Israelites of modern time, when you call one another Moshe.
Moshe.
Yeah, but from the beginning it is an Egyptian name. And you can imagine, if we look into the history, how strange things are. Moses was at the court for 40 years. I mean, really the best education, I mean, most powerful thing you can even think of.
Yes.
Then he was a shepherd, I mean, in the middle of nowhere for 40 years, doing nothing except talking to sheep and in a desert environment or a wilderness. And then God decides to call him. And he starts to work, really, and doing a good job when he's 80. Yeah, that's a
right.
good message for people that think they can retire.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. Have you seen anything about retirement in the Bible?
No, I have not, in fact.
I mean, Joseph, that was a prime minister of Egypt, he came into office when he was 30, and he was in office until he was 110.
Yes.
He was in office 80 years. I mean, if you had a U.S. president sitting here for 80 years, I mean, he would kind of have some influence over the country, and likely for such a long period.
I hope that never happens.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tommy. I agree.
So, yeah, the thing is that it's very interesting to follow Joseph. I just refer to the book, but there are so many things where he is doing things, or there are related things, and how is he related to the high priest in Egypt, and it's so many things that you can find around this person. It's so exciting to see it. I mean, it's like detective work. Or you're coming to a crime scene.
Yes.
You know, we all see this on television. You're coming to a crime scene. The bad thing is that they just take some cotton, you know, on somewhere, take some blood, whatever, put it in some machine, and suddenly you see the picture of the criminal, you know. But it doesn't work that way.
It doesn't work that way, no.
But if you're coming to a real crime scene, first when you look at it, you could ask yourself, has something happened here? There's no body here. not a dead person anywhere. We have a car, but there's no blood, you know. And when you start to look, there's nothing. But you know, when you look at television, they start to dig and dig and dig, and suddenly they have hundreds of pieces of information. And they put it together, and then that ends up in court. Same thing with Joseph. When you start to dig for him in Egyptian history, you start to find so many things and connections and here and there, and suddenly, oh, I have to start with the next chapter in the book. I can't do anything more. I mean, it's, it's like a flood, you know, just coming with all these small pieces.
It is, and yet the experts, I'll say the quote experts that you hear on Discovery Channel or History Channel or A&E, any of these channels that are coming up, primarily, I can't say 100% all, but primarily, the vast majority of them will say to you, we have searched and searched as archaeologists, and we just can't find anything to do with the Israelites in Egypt. Well, we are very proud and glad to be sitting here with a well-known scientist who has indeed uncovered multiple hardcore proofs inside Egypt that the Israelites were indeed there.
Yeah, but the important thing is that they should not believe me. They should look at the data and make their own judgment.
Absolutely.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely.
We need to clarify one thing for people so they don't say, well, Penny, you're biased. We have a program that we recorded with Brad Scott, who was a guest on the History Channel as one of their specialists. He says they have an agenda, and it isn't the agenda you people have.
Yes, I know. And when you speak to people that have studied theology, they are trained at universities or wherever they are, where they in most cases say, well, the Old Testament, we don't know anything really, but it's a nice story. It's a memory of a people, and we can study these things, and here we have poetry, and here we have what they told their children, etc., etc. And it becomes like a fairy tale, you know, you just tell it. And I've seen people that actually act in a way of getting into a shock when they understand that it might be some truth behind this. Just by showing some images. I don't have to tell them so much, but what do you think about this?
Well, yesterday was a feast of Esther for such a time as this, and I'm sitting here thinking, why did God wait all these years to bring people like you what's going on? Why is it, what's this time that God is wanting to show?
Yeah. But I think that something is going on right now, and that could be related to the 7th decade of Israel. I don't know. Question mark. But look at what happens within Israel's borders, popping up things in terms of archaeology.
Oh, yes.
You know, from more recent times compared to what we talk about here. But I mean, it's unbelievable.
It is.
This last year has been unbelievable, more than 5 years altogether.
Yeah, it's like a flood, you know. First you look at one thing and you haven't even studied, and then, oh, it's another thing too there. You know? Oh, a minister under David, his seal is found in Jerusalem.
Yes.
And then you think, oh, that's great. 2 or 3 years later, oh, another seal from another minister under David is found. So 2 of the 3 ministers or rulers under King David, their seals have been found, and they are recorded. The names are recorded in the book of Jeremiah. I mean,
it's awesome. It really is.
So there's a lot of exciting things. But one question here is, of course, if we can find any traces of Moses in Egyptian history. And we can.
All right.
We can. And the interesting thing is that there is a person in the Egyptian history that is well known. And he is found under the name Senmut. Now we talk about a perfect match between the chronology in the Bible and the chronology in Egypt. And this Senmut has all the characters you can think of regarding Moses. And the same way there has been a match with all the characters. He had a simple background. He never married in Egypt. He got very close to the court. They think that he was a lover to the queen at that time. That's the only explanation they have. And suddenly he just disappears from the country, and no one knows where he is, and they want to kill him. And there are many, many characters, about 35 in this case, and they just fit perfectly, but no one is asking the question, is this really Moses? And I connected this person to Hatshepsut in earlier editions. And I think it was 2 years ago now when they found the mummy of Hatshepsut. And they dated her. And it's a perfect match in terms of dating between the biblical chronology and the lifetime of Hatshepsut. And she had a stepson. And we can see the story at the temple in Del Bari, how she's getting pregnant, having a sexual relationship with the gods.
With a god.
And that's the way to explain an adoption, because it had to be of a godly origin. And one can see the whole series of images, and she's getting pregnant, and then she's holding a son, etc., etc. And Del El Bari, this big memorial place for Hatshepsut, is built by this Senmut. And if that is Moses, then we can have a full picture of Moses in the Egyptian history.
Wow.
And the modern historians are writing books about this Senmut, and they say, this is teasing us, it's a terror for us. We don't know his role or where he came from and his purpose and nothing. What is this? We can't fit him in. But I think he can be fitted in.
Oh, that is so incredible.
And you should note that his tomb was completely destroyed after his disappearance. Maybe we should take a look at a short film clip.
Let's do.
We have one that we call 21 here. It is from the film that is in its final stage now, the Exodus film. It's a film company here in the US that has worked with that. So this is a clip, a short sequence.
Oh, great. Oh,
I don't think they have it quite ready to...
The name of it, Lennart, is...
The Evidence.
The Evidence.
It's just that.
okay, we're ready to see
They
it.
do have it now.
Yeah.
Let's see that.
Journey with filmmaker Tim Mahoney and DNA research scientist Dr. Lennart Moller as they join others to track down new evidence in this investigation. Their pursuit leads them to new locations, some forbidden, some forgotten, but all now revealed on this adventure to the ancient lands of the Middle East.
The film is extremely timely in view of events taking place in the world today.
As you talked about the DNA approach to this story, I found out that there is a place up in Haifa, a researcher that we need to talk to.
DNA, as it turns out, is a very powerful tool because it contains within it markers that can help us understand our relationship to each other and our relationship to the past. It's now a commonly used tool in history to try to clarify certain questions.
So what we're looking at here is 200 years of research, which has brought us to a point where we can begin to understand the story of Exodus far better than we did, let's say, in the 19th century.
This is interesting. Yeah. Here we have Median, it says, and that is the part of Saudi Arabia today, and this east coast of the Gulf of Aqaba. And it says Grot Jethro, and Jethro was the father-in-law to Moses, and Moses spent 40 years in Midian. This is very interesting.
There are biblical sites, sites mentioned in the Old Testament that were exactly where they said they were, and they show some very interesting patterns.
The search has led them to the bottom of the sea, to the top of mountains, to the barren wilderness, and to ancient texts in old museums, meeting daring Exodus explorers and brave archaeologists not afraid to speak about the new evidence and what it might mean today.
One diver described it as if there had been a massive wreckage and all these parts were scattered everywhere with all twisted shapes, things that wouldn't grow in a natural way.
It's really compelling.
I like the chariot wheel.
And also when they were at the Jebel Waz site.
It's like a treasure. Around every corner there was a treasure.
The description saying that Pharaoh thought that the Israelites were trapped or imprisoned in the wilderness definitely applies to the geography and the geomorphology here. Very rugged peaks, no way to turn once you get into that wadi.
I just couldn't believe the amount of detail that was put into it.
I'm sure it's going to raise the hairs on the back of the neck of some people that are theologians. There's no question about it.
The split rock was pretty impressive.
One of the most incredible discoveries was this enormous split rock that we found. It was about a 200-foot climb to get up to the top of that hill, and this thing went up 4 stories.
It touched my heart. I mean, I was just like,
I couldn't wait for the next scene. It was wonderful, wonderful.
It answers lots of questions and it begs more.
You're going to have to go see this. I said, it's absolutely amazing. I said, it gives evidence for things that we have always believed is true.
Okay, when's it coming soon?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's always a struggle to get out products like this on the market. If we just think about Mel Gibson to get his film out, you know, that was not easy with all the resources he had. But the film is at its very final stage. It's just some polishing. So then it's just a matter of the next stage.
It's money, isn't it?
Sorry?
It's money.
Yeah.
And who's controlling the money? The same people who don't want this kind of truth out. That just dawned on me as I was watching that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, if we should have a global release, there is a require of a certain amount of money to do that. I mean, it's just the case how it is. But again, I just want to underline that Mel Gibson, with his film, he had severe problems. And he is a well-known character, and he has a lot of backup and a lot of resources, etc. And so it's not so easy to get such films out on the market.
And yet we have great assurity that it will, because for all of this to have come together the way it has, and all of these images and whatnot to be finally gathered together in one place. And Tim, as I've said here before, has done a masterful job of pulling together the experts in many different areas. For that to all be brought together and then not come to a final conclusion and being brought out, not going to happen. It's coming.
He's been working on this project for what, almost 9 years now. 8 years for sure, going on 9 years. And like Penny is saying, that he has gathered the experts concerning this subject, and as time has gone by, more and more and more has been added to this pool of information that he has. Now, he has a 3-hour film, he can have a 12-hour film. I mean, it could be mini-series. But what has to happen is that funding for the marketing and that release, which is very expensive, has to come first, and then we can, you know, then he'd be able to get it out there. With the release, supposedly, we'd like to see it, and they want to see it in Jerusalem first, and then to the
we
US.
have just got into the first hour, and I think we've only got down to about 15 clips. And we got a whole lot more, am I correct?
Yeah, we have some 800 one. Yeah.
We have a 5-hour program today.
We'll be here till June.
Yes, that would be great. Well, all I can say is this book is so incredible. Like Jim was telling me, it's an Encyclopedia Britannica on the Exodus. And
so they can go ahead and start ordering it at the bookstore.
I think so, yes. Okay. But it is, if you are interested in at all, you will be totally intrigued by the information in this book. I know I am. And I just skimmed through some of it so I could have an idea of what you were going to talk about today. The pictures alone are worth having the book, you know, without all the detailed information that you have put into it. So I'm anxious to see where we go from here in the next segment of this program. And there's so many interesting things about the pharaohs. I don't know if you're going to touch on any of that, but
Tommy visited with me this morning about that, and I thought, wow, no wonder this story has not been brought out. Well, we're going to take a short station break. You need to come back with us. Don't touch your dial, and we will blow your socks off in the next hour.
If you enjoyed this program, GLC asks that you would help support us in the production of these programs. You can make your contribution through our website at www.glc.us.com, by phone 432-563-5200 or 1-866-846-5200, or by mail at P.O. Box 61,000, Midland, Texas 79711-1000. We would like to extend our thanks for your prayers and support.
Well, there's
Welcome back.
yesterday, Tommy and I was having a cup of coffee at an IHOP, and the man come up and started telling us what his preacher thought about us. So this program ought to create some more of these incidents at the coffee shop about Jewish roots and the
boy.
truth of what's going on. And what are we talking about here?
Well, we are talking to Jim and Penny Caldwell and Dr. Lennart Moller, and it is
it's one
mind-blowing.
of those things. Yeah.
Thank all of you for being here today and gracing us with your presence. It's
It is
wonderful
our pleasure,
to have you.
Tommy. Now, we appreciate being here.
Where do we go from here?
Well, I've got my seatbelt on. Let's go.
Well, we could, if we look at something that I find interesting, is image number 19. When this Senmut that we talked about earlier on, that is most likely Moses in the Egyptian history, he runs away. He just disappears from the history of Egypt. No one knows where he disappeared, and he just suddenly it doesn't exist anymore. But there is a very great anger. They want to destroy him or kill him while he's not present. So what we can see on this image is that the tomb that was made for him, for this Senmut, is just cut into pieces. And what we see here is just a small section of the ceiling. But the tomb is like, I'd say, a small church, or a rather big building. And they chiseled it into pieces, the whole tomb, just in hatred of this person that wasn't present. And they wanted to hurt him or kill him or whatever, him being at some other location. So from the biblical history, we know that Moses came to the land of Midian. And then we have that issue to deal with. And if we look at our biblical maps, first I want to say that the Bible is one text. Biblical maps represent an editorial product. So we shouldn't really compare the biblical maps with the biblical text. It's totally different origins, and I will comment upon that. What I'm trying to say here is that if you look at these maps, they tend to change over time. And they're putting up question marks, and they have different alternatives, and depending on what Bible from what publisher you buy, there's a slightly different map. Especially, I'm talking about these times now, and the times around Exodus. So one of these issues is where to locate the land of Midian. We know that Moses was in the land of Midian.
Yes.
He was on a mountain or a high elevated area with his sheep. Taking care of them. And that is when he has this experience when God is calling him. And the message is to bring out my people of Egypt and bring them to this very mountain to worship. So if we know where Moses stayed with his father-in-law and his family, then we also know where the mountain is. And if we look at Mount Sinai on the Sinai Peninsula, the traditional Mount Sinai, when people go there, serious people, people dealing with theology or archaeology or just know of the history, and they have the Bible and they look at the location and they say, it doesn't fit. It doesn't absolutely not fit. And I can go through many, many things that doesn't fit. And the thing is that it's absolutely correct. I mean, from their perspective, they are right in the statement that it doesn't fit. And from that, we can have two different conclusions. And the most common one is that the Bible is not reliable. But that is like when you run around in a forest with a compass and you get lost. And if you get lost, you take a pair of scissors and tape and try to modify your map. And that doesn't work. By definition, it doesn't work.
Right.
You have to go back to your latest known point or reference and try to find a way again. And I know about running around in the forest in Sweden, you know, as being in the army in darkness, just with a compass. You should find your way without reference points, etc.
Wow.
It's not easy.
Not easy.
I mean, you have to work hard. But the thing is, if we say that the mountain on Mount Sinai, the Mount Sinai on the Sinai Peninsula is not the one, what are we doing with that kind of data, that kind of information? And the first thing we can say, especially to all people that have been there and climbed the mountain, it's a beautiful place. It's a spectacular climb. It's to see the sunrise from the peak, 7,500 feet, and see the monastery and just be in that environment. It's great. But it doesn't have anything to do with Moses. What it has to do with is that some monks found skeleton parts on the highest mountain on the peninsula, and they claimed that it was a saint from Alexandria, and therefore they labeled or named the mountain to be Mount of St. Catherine, this saint. And then they built a chapel at the foot of the mountain, the Chapel of St. Catherine. And then they built the monastery of St. Catherine. No connection whatsoever with Moses. And just in parentheses, they have suggested some 12, 13, or even 14 mountains on the peninsula. And they don't fit either. And therefore, the common conclusion is, well, we have a nice memory. There is tales and stories about this. We know that many different people have put this together, and we can't connect it to any known location. But it's a nice story. It's interesting.
A nice legend.
And it's a culture input into our ancient history. I look at it in a little bit different way. My question is, if it's not there, this mountain, where is it? And the key issue is to find out where the land of Midian is. And if we can look at figure 20, I'll show you what I did was to go into ancient maps. And here we can see a map from 1719. It's made for a French court in Europe, the absolutely best cartographers during that time. And in the upper and middle part, we can see the Sinai Peninsula, this V-shaped area. The Gulf of Suez to the left and the Gulf of Aqaba to the right. The Gulf of Aqaba looks a little bit different, but still they found that. And then east of the Gulf of Aqaba, what can we see there? Well, we can see the land of Midian. And the living quarters of Jethro, the father-in-law to Moses. And when we go to maps that are going back a few hundred years in time, there's no doubt about that the land of Midian has never ever been anywhere else than east of the Gulf of Aqaba.
Exactly.
But when you look at some of the modern biblical maps, since they want to locate Mount Sinai on this peninsula, this V-shaped area we saw in that illustration, then they tend to force the land of Midian to really fit in
go up around
to the Sinai Peninsula, because they know that it must be in the land of Midian, and then it gets even more confusing. So the land of Midian, to cut a very, very long story short, is on the east coast of the Gulf of Aqaba. And there is where we have to look. And that opens up a totally different perspective. It's like opening up doors into a cathedral, and suddenly you see things that you haven't even thought about.
Right.
And you know, when you look at a cathedral from the outside, it looks in one way. But when you open it up, you can be surprised by all the things you can see there. And that is the same reaction. When you open up the land of Midian, it is a gold mine of finds. But if we look at figure 22, this is an important one, because if we assume that the Hebrews are in the land of Egypt, and here you can see the Nile delta, the upper part, the greenish area, and you see the Nile River. And if they were in that area, Goshen, they have different, from a scientific point of view, different alternatives to leave this area. Number one, that goes towards the south, is not possible because there's a lot of mountains there. So then they have to go in the Nile River Valley. And they did not go through the cities of Egypt, and they didn't follow the Nile River. We know that. So we can eliminate number one. Number two, to go over North Africa, and then Gibraltar, and then Spain, and Italy, and Greece, you know, no one has suggested that. No. And neither do I. So number two, but from a scientific point of view, it's relevant. But we can also eliminate number two. Number three is the most common one on the biblical maps. You know, up in the delta, across a lake, and then down to the traditional Mount Sinai on the Sinai Peninsula. The only sad thing with that is that that lake did not exist at the time of Exodus. So we can just skip that. It doesn't fit for any other purpose either, I mean, whatever you compare it to. But let us just say the lake did not exist at that time because we talk about the delta area that builds up sediments and so on. And already, I mean, until this very day, it's just a very, very thin piece of land on the other side of this. So we can also skip number 3. Number 4 is relatively easy to look at. And God said, according to the biblical text, to the people, don't take number 4. Well, he didn't really say that. He said, don't take the coast road because you will end up in war.
Right. Yes.
So, and then we basically only have number 5 left because we have a high plateau in the north of the peninsula and we have high mountains in the south. And this is the trade route that goes from Egypt towards the Arabian Peninsula.
Right.
So we can assume that number 5 is irrelevant, and it just happens to be that number 5 leads to the land of Midian. So Moses knows of this road or this route. So then the question is what type of water they crossed. And I must say that this is one of the most non-scientific things I ever come across in terms of what people say and state. First they say that the Red Sea means the Sea of Reeds. And since there are no reeds in the sea, you have to look into a lake. And then you end up in Egypt. And this is extremely confusing. And I just want to say to everyone, and this is the truth, the full truth, and nothing but the truth. There is not ever mentioned a Red Sea ever in the biblical text.
That's right.
There is no Red Sea there.
That's right.
There is no Red Sea. And therefore we should not play around with these words. There's only one name for the crossing of this body of water, and that is Yam Suf. And it's referenced about 50 times in the Old Testament. So what I do when I look at a thing like this, first I go to the original name, then I look at all these references, because they must point in the same direction. But when you have witnesses, they will tell different stories. You know, if we have been at a car accident, one would say, oh, it was raining. The other one said, oh, it was terrible, all the noise when it happened. And I'd say, there were 3 wounded people and 1 died. And another would say, oh, we were all dressed in brown clothes or whatever. Typical witnesses saying different things about the same event. If you are at the court and people are saying exactly the same thing, one after the other, then you know this is not really correct. And that's how these people that question criminals are trying with questions, repeating them, because it's very hard to remember lies, you know. So sooner or later, you just give the wrong answer, and then they nail them. So the question is really how to find this Yam Suf. And my standpoint is that we should never translate something that we don't really know the exact meaning of. We had rather recent, now we are in the early days of March, but rather recent we had the celebration that we connected to the house of bread. If we shall translate the word, I mean Bethlehem, the house of bread.
Yes.
But we keep Bethlehem as the original name. We do translate it.
Right.
We call it Bet-El, the house of God. We don't translate it. We use the name Jerusalem to Jerusalem, although it means something really, if you translate it. Jerusalem's place of peace or something like that. So let us keep the original name and then look into it. And if we then should look at what Yam Suf really means, if you look at figure number 23 here, Yam Suf can, you see here in the yellow, a number of suggestions what it could mean. And then there are other 2 related Hebrew expressions that could add some more suggestions. And I have heard from different people, different groups, and rabbis and so on, the Sea of the Termination, the End Sea, the Border Sea, the Sea of Destruction, the Red Sea, the Sea of Reeds, and I mean, yeah, there's a lot of choices here. And then one can ask the question, how on earth could this body of water be named the Red Sea? And this is, in one case, relatively easy to understand. And if we go to number 24, I'll show you maps. I love maps, these ancient maps. And if you look at this map, and you look at the midsection, you can see North America. Can you see the huge island west of North America that we have along the whole California coast and Oregon coast, etc.? Do you see that huge island? Yep. It's a light green color west of North America. This is the best French map of North America, made for the Royal Court of France, 1719. And they believe that there's a huge island west of North America along the whole coast. And this is actually the peninsula that we can find in Mexico that they have misplaced.
I see. Okay.
And then they also missed Alaska, and when they were there, just draw a line up to the North Pole. You know, they are beautiful, the maps, but they are not always accurate. We can't use maps. That's the message. We can't find maps, and they are not reliable. So if we just go to one text, and that is figure number 25, I just want to quote that one. It's an interesting text. And it describes where Yam-Suf is located. I'm skipping all these references that are found and just take one verse, or two verses actually, from 1 Kings that summarizes this. King Solomon built a fleet of ships at Eshon-Geber, which is in the Gulf of Aqaba, which is near Elat, which is close to today's Eilat, in the north part of Aqaba, on the shore of Yam-Suf, in the land of Edom. Edom is north of the Gulf of Aqaba. Then Hiram, the Phoenician king, sent his servants with the fleet. And we talk about fleets here, with a lot of ships. And Hiram was really a sailor. I mean, we know from other sources that he was sailing the seas on earth 1, 2, 3 years long trips in many directions.
Wow.
We really talk about the expert. Yeah, if we go back to the text, it is not only stated that it was Hiram, but all the seamen that know the sea, not a lake, that know the sea. And they served Solomon, and they went to Ophir. No one knows where that is. It could be India, it could be South America, and they brought gold back to King Solomon. If we state that Yam-Suf is a lake in Egypt, we have to locate Eshon-Geber, Elat, Edom in Egypt. We must, as a conclusion of that, say that this powerful King Solomon had his royal fleet of seagoing vessels in a shallow lake in Egypt.
I think not.
I mean, would U.S. have their fleet in a lake in Mexico? Their fleet that can actually travel the seas. And how would they be able to travel this lake in Egypt for 1, 2, 3 years and require the best seamen on earth to find gold that is not to be found there? So in this way we can go step by step and deal with this. And the conclusion is that, to cut again a very long story short, Gulf of Aqaba is most likely what is called Yam-Suf. That is summarized here, but there are many, many more references to it. And if we look at image 26, we can see the Gulf of Aqaba from a more satellite perspective, from the south towards the north. And in the very upper part there we have Eilat and Aqaba. To the east, we have, to the right, we have Jordan and then Saudi Arabia. And to the left, we have Egypt, the Sinai Peninsula. And you should see the whitish area there in the middle. That's an interesting location, which is named Nuweiba today. And that is an interesting location. If you keep that in mind, that image, and then we go to the next one, 27. Here we can see the suggested route of the Exodus that goes across the Sinai Peninsula according to what we discussed before. And then somewhere in the end of this crossing there, they turn and they go towards the south, and they should reach Yam-Suf. There's only one wadi to choose, Wadi Watir, and that goes to this location that is labeled here as Nuweiba, and that is this whitish peninsula that we just looked at. And we can understand that the Pharaoh said, when his spies reported all these events, that when they turned, they were trapped, they were locked in, according to the text. And if you are south of the points from the upper part of the Gulf of Suez and the Gulf of Aqaba, you are trapped within the peninsula. There's no way to go. And if you then, in addition, are in this wadi, which is surrounded by up to 6,000 feet high mountains, you are trapped from every direction you can think of. And when you come out of this wadi, you will be on this white peninsula. If we then look at 28, the next one that also illustrates this, we can see from a satellite image this white peninsula. And we see the wadi as this white line in the middle. And there's a small black line there, which is a highway of today. And when you end up there, you're surrounded by high mountains. You have the army approaching from behind. You have the deep sea in front of you. And you can again think about what Moses felt at this location. He must have been so sad, so desperate. He would have blamed God for doing all these terrible things for him, that God was going to kill his own people. And it must have been an awful situation on that peninsula. And the interesting thing is, when you look at this peninsula, we talk about some of the deepest waters we have on Earth. We have 2 tectonic plates that have the borderline here in the Gulf of Aqaba. So it's 6,000 feet deep waters.
Wow.
I mean, you don't cross that. And then you have 7,500 feet high mountains around. I mean, so you could fall basically down many, many miles. Downhill, so to speak, from sharp mountains. And you know how sharp they are.
Absolutely.
Rugged, very rugged.
I mean, it's nothing. I mean, it's not like Smoky Mountains in the east of the U.S. You just take your car and drive on the ridge and you take a walk. Very, very sharp mountains. It's okay, we have to skip the Gulf of Aqaba. Or ask the question, if the biblical text is correct, that they really were there must be a way out of that place. And it just happens to be, if we just take that shore and make it very, very short, that there is a kind of an underwater highway that goes from one side to the other. And from the other side, the Saudi side today, from the Arabian Peninsula, there's been a washout of gravel in the same way. And these two structures, if I should call it so, they meet one another in the middle. And you have a kind of an underwater bridge in the midst of this very, very deep sea. Still it's deep, but it's a very soft gradient downhill and a soft one uphill. And when we measure that, that is within the norms for handicapped people in the US.
Really?
If you need a ramp for a wheelchair, it's within that type of limits. So it's an easy going downhill and then uphill slope. It just happened to be there. The other thing is that when you remove the water, this is kind of a rough type of grain or gravel, all the water disappears immediately. So when you take away the water, you're on dry ground.
Wow.
That's interesting. If you have heard about that somewhere in some text.
No mud.
No
mud.
No.
No, it's
And
granite.
the reason is we have a very low sedimentation rate, lowest on Earth. But since this is a high rising area, the tidal currents are going back and forth like this every day, taking possible sediments into the deep basins. And therefore, we have been there with huge underwater camera, remote control equipment. And it's like a soccer field or whatever. I mean, it's just flat, no corals, no rocks, nothing. It's just flat.
Swept.
And it's probably, we don't know exactly, but it's probably, let's say, around 2 miles wide.
Really?
Something like that.
Wow.
In that range.
I didn't realize it was that wide.
It's big.
Yeah, but if you look at the peninsula, it's the width of the peninsula is probably 4 miles or so.
Okay.
4 or 5 miles.
Take that much for, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, but the distance is not that long. It's about, if we talk about miles, I'd say it's about 7, 8 miles across. On flat, dry ground. Knowing that the enemy was behind, so they probably was in some rush.
Kind of rushing.
So, I mean, it's not a big effort. And again, we don't talk about slaves that are dying. We talk about bodybuilders that are out walking on flat ground.
Right.
Having a good time.
Yeah.
If I should call it a good time.
Yeah.
The adrenaline was running.
Yeah, probably was running very hard.
One thing that I would like to add to that is sitting before you here are three witnesses of this. Unbeknownst to one another, in the mid-90s, Lennart was on the Egyptian side at Nuweiba making multiple dives. Jim and I were on the Saudi Arabian side making multiple dives into this region. We can verify, just as eyewitnesses, this does exist.
Yeah.
And this material he's speaking about is exactly as he says it is. We've seen it.
Let me add just this one thing. As he's talking about when the water pulls back from this type of material, it's like a crushed granite, this land bridge, what it's made of. It is as hard as asphalt.
Yeah.
I drove my car as the tide went out. It went out several hundred feet, and we drove out onto it.
Yeah.
The problem is after 8 or 9 or 10 hours, it becomes like quicksand.
Oh, does it?
So my truck just woof, went right into the, and we had to dig it out very carefully to get it back on the shore before the tide came back.
Yes.
Because it would have been underwater.
Really?
But imagine what happened to the Egyptians. They all cross, and then here comes the army. And then what happened to the wheels of the chariots? They
fell
clogged
off.
up and got bogged down.
And it specifically says that in the text, that the wheels of the Egyptians began to drag. And yet, for the Israelites,
broke off.
And
they
then
went right across.
They had already crossed.
They were already on the other side.
Yes.
And there's so many exciting things. If we look, just don't listen to us. I mean, what we're saying. Look at image 30. And on the image number 30, it's a kind of a tourist photo. But can you see the peninsula, this Nuweiba? Look at how flat it is. How it's stretching right out into these extremely deep waters. And you can see where the waves are breaking far out. You can see it's shallow all the way out, as long as we can see on this kind of, shall I call it, tourist photograph. It's just a snapshot of the situation there. So you don't need so much imagination to understand that this very flat area is going across. And on the other side, what you see in the background there, that's the mountains of the land of Midian. So it's not that far across at all, and they would easily do it in a couple of hours, I'd say.
Yes.
Yeah, show 31, and you'll see it, the same shot of the peninsula that's sticking out on the Saudi side. This was a shot that we had taken up from the ridge a little bit, but see how it's extending out into the water. So out, from both sides, you have this underwater land bridge coming together that meets in the middle.
And far distant is a thin whitish line. That is the peninsula, the Nuweiba Peninsula. And we see the 6,000, 7,500 or so high mountains of the Sinai Peninsula above this white line. Wow. So you can see that the land is stretching out also from here. And when we dive here, if we look at the 32, the question is, of course, do we find anything? And here I just show one example. The brown, this is a femur bone, the upper part of the leg from the hip to the knee. And the brownish from an ancient tomb in Sweden. And the whitish here, that's found on the seabed. And when osteologists, experts in skeleton science, so to speak, look at this, they say that this is, as they say, highly likely. They compare it with everything. They don't know what they analyze because I'll never let them know what they do.
Don't tell them.
So they started to say, oh, it's not chimpanzee, it's not gorilla, and they continue then measure things, etc., and say this is most likely a human femur. We find many other things on the seabed, and what we can say is that there has been a disaster at this location several thousand years back in time, involving chariots, humans, horses, and oxen. And these remains are in many cases twisted into one another. And you can understand, I mean, disaster is the headline.
Chaotic.
Yeah, chaos. It's just. So this as such, as a find, is not evidence. But if we have all the events before, and all the events after, and it just happened to be in the midst of that, that you find something on both sides of this bridge, if I should call it bridge, you find these remains, then it fits into the story of the Hebrews. But again, if you're in a court, there's in many cases not one single evidence that is important. It's a chain of events. So you can establish that the person was there, you have the fingerprint, you have etc., etc., etc. And in that sense, this is one important piece of evidence that connect the land of Midian with the Sinai Peninsula with this type of finds.
Wow.
So there are things, and we have a couple here beside me that found something else in the southern part. Maybe you should tell, the type of character of the rock and what you found there.
What he's talking about is this coral that has been thrown up on the shore as if it were just ripped from the seabed in a giant wave like a tsunami, pulled up on the shore and deposited there. And so part of our interest was to search these rocks and to see if we could find anything that was bronze or metal or anything that would stand out that would be, you could recognize as being man-made. And so one of the things we found in one of these heaps was the next slide, slide number 33, were pieces of bronze. Understand that it's under a 15, 20-foot wall of coral that's been deposited there, and this is in the midst of it, and towards the lower end, because she was standing there trying to knock this out of the coral, and I had to walk up with a maul and a chisel to break this out of what's almost concrete. So the only way this could have been there was it was there when the heap itself was formed there. You see what I'm saying? And then it has been eroded away, and these things are being exposed.
And but Jim, if you should be honest, you can find a lot of bronze in the environment, can't you?
You can't find any other bronze.
Why can't you find bronze?
Bronze is a man-made material.
Yeah, that's the important thing.
Exactly, and I had it analyzed myself, and it is a bronze that predates our equipment. Looked at it as a nuclear scan. We have equipment out in the refinery where we could check types of metal. What type of pipe is this? What's it consist of? What's the metallurgy of that pipe? We had a machine where we could take an x-ray of it and know what the composition was. And it was bronze of a pre-1800 vintage. So it was older than 1800, but no way to know if it was 2,000, 3,000 years old. They don't have compositions from that, at least in our equipment, we wouldn't know. It's a very old piece.
And one thing that I would add to this just very quickly, we have been scuba divers for way too many years than I want to admit on the air. And we have seen many places where sea levels have dropped over time and coral reefs have been exposed and you have a skeleton there of a coral reef. That is not the situation here. We had huge staghorn corals and elkhorn corals that had been ripped up from their bases. You can see the root structure that were upside down at the top of this very odd formation far onto the shore, and with all kinds of starfish and sand dollars and other things interspersed all throughout this in a very chaotic manner. This is not evidence just left over from a recession of the sea level. This is something entirely different.
And another thing we can add here is also when you are at the museum in Cairo, where they have all these artifacts and so on, when you have a horse, here in the US, for example, you have a lot of leather straps around the head of the horse just to control the horse. In Egypt, they didn't have that. And you can see these things at the museum. They had small, tiny chains of bronze. And what we just saw in the previous image could be one of these links, so to speak, in a chain that they had for the horses. That could be a question of origin. But it's a man-made material. And bronze was very common in Egypt. They made weapons, they made parts for the chariots and things for the horses, etc., out of bronze.
Hubs for the wheels, the chariot wheels were held on by bronze.
It could be many different reasons, and that's the reason there's also a possibility to find things also underwater, because bronze is very resistant to be eroded. Let's do a scientific approach to suggested roads and look at page 29. I'm kind of a scientist somewhere in my mind. On top, you see 5 suggested roads, and that's the arrows I talked about before, different ways to get out of Egypt.
Yes.
And then on the left side, I haven't written the things on the left side, but that's requirements for the roads based on the Jewish historian Josephus or the Bible. So I just made a system out of it. This is, for me, systematic theology. That's where it's labeled red, it means that it doesn't fit, and where it's green, it does mean that it fits. And you see that there are some fits there for the first 3 and a little bit more for number 4, but number 5 fulfill all the criteria. And number 5 is the one we discuss here right now. So this is, you see, again I want to underline, I didn't write the Bible. I didn't help Josephus with his writings. I just looked for everything they said about these events. I didn't invent these 5 ways to get out of Egypt. It's just the possible ways to get out of Egypt. And then I put it together to see, do I see any pattern? This is science, you know, pattern recognition. And it just came out that everything was fulfilled in alternative 5 that goes across the Sinai Peninsula.
And into Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, that happens to be also in the region that even today is called Midian.
Yes, absolutely. Madian.
Yeah.
The Arabs of the region absolutely call it to this day, Madian.
Yeah.
It's just how they pronounce it.
Another comment about this chart that we're looking at, this is out of his book. These things appear many times in his book to give you a comparison of the alternate routes or the alternate condition or the alternate possibility. And then it lines up the matches in a way that, wow, you know, that's almost impossible that it couldn't be that way. It has to be right.
Yeah.
So
let's look at one. I have one more here, number 34. And that is done in the same manner, but a little bit different. And this is suggested crossing sites. And the first one, with all the red markings here, that's the Lake Monsala. That's the lake in the Delta region that we talked about earlier on. And the right one, to the very right, with all the greens, that's through Yam Suf, through the Red Sea, through Gulf Aqaba. And this is another example, and you can see again, here I couldn't even give the references because there are so many requirements that you can see on the left there. So I took all the requirements for the crossing and then took the suggested crossing sites, and I just compare it. And then anyone can go in. Again, I haven't written these texts from the Bible. I haven't invented these crossing sites. I'm just referring to what's found in different occasions and literature, so forth. So this is, for me, again, systematic theology. Find a system. Take all the references, and they should point in one direction. And when you put them in a system, and we are allowed to use science when we analyze these things. This thing that is puzzling for me is that I don't find this in the literature today. I don't find it, really.
One more thing that I would like to mention just very quickly before we leave the sea. In the Psalms it says that they crossed in the midst of the sea. In my mind, I'm always thinking the midst of the sea. Well, of course, he brought them through the mighty waters. Yes, very poetic, very beautifully. But does it possibly mean exactly how it is written? The midst of the sea? Leonard brought up that photograph a while ago, about right down in the midst, the middle part of the sea, midst thereof, is right through the center of the Gulf of Aqaba. Right in the middle. How about that? Just like it says.
Just happens to be that.
Just kind of happens.
Yeah, it just happens.
I mean, I don't like this, you know. It actually sounds like there is something behind it. I mean, some real history.
Some real truth there.
I can tell you that I've taken part in some archaeological investigations at different locations. And, you know, you find charcoal at one location and some small round stones. And then they say, well, this is likely the kitchen. And if this is the kitchen, and then they start to build a theory around it. And I've been lying on my knees, you know, with brushes and whatever you're using. And I can just say that with the abundance of things we can connect to this story of the book of Exodus, if we compare it to other types of archaeology today, we have much, much more than they normally have. And in many cases, they don't even have any physical artifacts or objects. It's just that they analyze the soil and say, because that we have more iron here, that means that, and therefore,
that's right,
etc.
But as Lennart was saying, you're following a pathway of true scientifically able to examine either artifacts or steles in stone from Egypt right under the sea and into Saudi Arabia, and the evidence continues.
Well,
that's what's so amazing.
And one other thing is, and again we say this quite often, but it's really very, very true, is you have to be looking in the right location to start to see these things match up and come together, and for the evidence to start speaking, hey, I'm here. Look at all these points in this area.
Right.
If we weren't looking like at Lake Marsala, we were looking at the Gulf of Suez.
You wouldn't find any of this.
You don't find anything, and you get discouraged, and you decide, you know, again, back to the beginning.
It's just a nice Bible story.
It's a nice story.
Right.
But when you start shifting things over into this area towards Arabia, you start seeing
Yeah,
exactly.
I mean, it's like if I was in Sweden. Sweden is a very long country, and if I'm far up in the north, and I just want to look for Americans there, and I don't find any Americans, and then I write a book about it, well, it's likely not the case that there are any Americans. I have screened the whole northern part of that part of the world. Didn't find a single American. And I mean, I'm correct in that way. Well, not fully correct, but let's say I'm close to the truth there.
He was happy about it too.
Yeah,
so.
but the thing is that I couldn't, of course, make that statement if I didn't look at all the parts of the world. Then I could make that statement.
Right.
And therefore, if you do an investigation, and in many cases people are doing that, you know, I mean, very qualified archaeologists, they're doing very good science, but they are, for a decade or two, or maybe even 3, in one small village somewhere looking for something. And there are very few of them that put it into a general perspective, a kind of a pattern or a movement of people or whatever.
And it's also very difficult when you're not allowed into some of these regions
and
to do the field work.
When you're allowed to do the field work, but it's very sensitive what you say about what you find.
That's right.
Because if you just state that these are likely the Hebrews, you're out of the place.
Out.
You're not allowed to
throw you out.
Just that could just be worth mentioning without giving names and so on. If we go into, we have a film clip that we call Conspiracy 35. This is also from the film. That is done based on these finds and the book, and just to show a kind of clip that covers some of these subjects.
Let's see it.
There's a mystery being revealed today. Yet forces stand against its discovery. Why would they try to hide new evidence of the Exodus? And even more startling, why would they try to destroy it?
I don't think that would ever happen. I don't think anybody would ever destroy a site for political reasons.
There is some stone pillar on the seaside. He shouted me, don't tell to any other persons. There was a stone pillar was there, but now there is no more stone pillar.
There are sites in areas where people cannot work, and we're going to lose them, because the political regimes of these particular states in the Near East will not allow research on the topic of the Old Testament.
For over 20 years, these explorers have risked their lives to uncover the mystery of the Exodus.
The second time we went into the site, once we entered the valley, within 15 minutes, the Bedouin were on us. He drew his weapon. His son drew a shotgun. And within minutes, another vehicle pulled up. They had weapons, and we were arrested.
There was often times when you'd see an official boat, police or military, I don't know. They were definitely watching us. I mean, they weren't even subtle about it.
There was an army helicopter which swooped down to the area that we had just been diving on and spent about a minute or two just hovering over the area.
I get the feeling they wanted us to know that they were watching what we were doing.
Just try digging in Egypt, try digging in Israel, try digging in Jordan, and try digging in Saudi Arabia to prove the cohesiveness of this story, and you'll see what you're up against.
You can't go into somebody else's country and demand to dig up their land. It's as simple as that.
And why won't they let you dig there? Well, because World War III would break out.
There are definitely countries and people and places all over this universe who don't want the story of the Exodus to be told. They'd like it to be buried and forgotten because everything it represents is something that they can't tolerate.
Wow.
Two brave people, or three, yes.
Yeah.
At least three.
Yeah.
But we know there are several more working with you.
Yes.
Yeah, and some of the people we saw here have been involved in the diving teams, and we have made different combinations of a very small group of people to do these investigations. But, you know, it's rather tough. When we dive, there is no surface support. You have to swim about a mile out in sea waters with 80 pounds of equipment hanging on your body. You're diving in too deep waters. You have about 20 minutes diving time per day. Shark-infested water, toxic fish, strong streams and currents. And it's, I mean,
oh, wow.
It is, it's not easy.
It's hazardous.
And it's very dangerous, really.
Yeah.
And
that explains why that is so clean.
Yeah.
The current.
Yeah.
One builds it up.
Yeah.
And then the other one.
Yeah, the tidal current really is going back and forth like this.
I wish we had a lot more time that you could talk about the devastation of Egypt when
that's
Israel
another
left.
story.
I know it is, and I wish we had time to cover it because until I looked at your book, I had no idea. You know, I'd never even thought about it. I knew they took everything and left, but I had no idea of that.
It probably looked like Berlin 1945.
Might have.
I mean,
you're talking about from the result of the plagues and all the things that happened to the Egyptians.
All of the plagues, but and the death of the firstborn.
Even among animals.
Yes.
We don't think about that, you know. Normally.
No. What is a good thing, though, Tommy, is that Lennart has that so amazingly detailed in his book and documented.
Oh, it's awesome.
So anyone that wants to get into it.
Really, if you are interested at all, you really need to get this book.
Yeah. It's, I mean, again, I want to just say that you should not believe me or the people I have with me here. I mean, we have been there and we can verify, but that's one thing, it's a testimony.
Yes.
I mean, look at the raw data. Judge yourself. I don't care the statement people are coming up with. They can like it or hate it, but I mean, look at the data and come up with a reaction. Don't speculate or just think about things. Look at the data. That's my...
If you truly want to be logical about it, even not at all from a religious standpoint.
Right.
None.
Absolutely
Just,
not.
You know, if I tell you I am wearing a bright purple jacket right now, you can look very plainly here and see I am not wearing a bright purple jacket. And that's just about how dramatic some of this evidence is.
Yeah.
It absolutely is.
And I think that, I mean, we cannot cover all these things. I mean, normally it takes about 2 days to scratch the surface.
We can come back.
But I would like to, if you could show image 50, I will give you one thing here that most people haven't a clue of. If you look up in the left corner, you see the Sinai Peninsula around these red lines. And then if they were in the land of Midian, which is represented by the X we see there. And then the question is, did they went back? That's the red lines that indicate that. Did they went back to the Sinai Peninsula? Of course not. It's about the size of 2 Los Angeles. It's a tiny little place for being 40 years. And did they went back to Egypt? No, they did not. Did they went into Canaan up north? No. There were some spies sent up, but that was a later event. Did they went up east of the Dead Sea, up to Moab, today's Jordan and these areas? No, that was the later part. And then the question is, if they are at this X, at the land of Midian, where did they spend the 40 years in the wilderness? And there's only one answer to it, and that is the Arabian Peninsula, that you can see this whole yellow area. And what I've labeled there in the book, you can see much, much more of this. When I go through these ancient maps, I find so many Hebrew names, ancient maps, not modern maps, Hebrew names of families of Abraham, of the family of Jacob, and I find names like Israel, the living quarters of the tribe of Gad, that actually settled outside Canaan, in parentheses. And piece after piece after piece. And if we go back to this image, I have one thing labeled here, and that is not really one of the campsites.
What's the number of that one, Lennart?
That is 50, number 50. Same map. You see, I have labeled one thing there with a K, with a blue circle. And that is the Wadi of Korah, or Korach. And that is the place where there was a revolt against Moses.
Yes.
And 250 people or so just died at that event. That's just one location. But in the book, I have pinpointed many different suggestions for campsites. And then we can follow them down on the coastlines and then up again. And then we have this Arabic source that says, when Moses was with his people, on the way back to the promised land, they passed through or by Mecca.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Which is exactly according to what I have suggested as campsites. You see, we have about 15 campsites in the beginning of this list from Numbers. That is basically from Egypt to the mountain. We have about 15 in the end, which is east of the Dead Sea and into Jericho. And then we have about 15 in the middle that no one knows anything about. And there we find traces and connections to the Arabian Peninsula.
All in Arabia. And by the way, I would like to add, many of these maps that Lennart has studied are the originals that he is in the possession of.
Yes, I have them
So
back
this is
home.
not something that has likely been altered because he has an extensive collection of ancient maps.
Oh,
To
that's
work
great.
with originals, you know, science again.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I went through basically all maps of relevance from these time periods. And we should look at the names before they have modernized them into Arabic names.
Yes. I think the thing that astounded me the most when Jim and Penny first let us meet you through the film was your discovery of that menorah.
Yeah. And that is Dr. Kim from Korea that was working in Saudi that found it.
Yes, it was.
It's a perfect image of the menorah. And if we just, 2-3 words, just say that the letters behind it or beside it or just in connection to the menorah, they are very old, proto-alphabetical language letters, which means that this menorah is likely the oldest menorah that exists. The oldest we know of is the one in Rome, depicted when the Romans took it from Jerusalem, 70 AD. But this one could likely be, and most likely be, around the time of Exodus, around 1500 BC, 1446 or so. And of course, where do we find it? In the land of Midian.
In the Midian.
You know, talking about when I talk about you people, I always talk about, because we're in oil country, and many of the geologists here went over to find where Asher dipped his toe.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
And then to find out it sits right in the main, am I correct in when I say the main oil field of Saudi Arabia?
The Eastern Province.
Right
is
where
the,
he worked.
Yeah, largest oil fields in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, and
I was hoping that we had that Asher on one of these old maps, but we don't have the slide.
There are so many
It's in the
images.
book, though.
Yeah.
That one is, and it points to the name of Asher in the Eastern Province, right over this vast area of the oil fields. Yeah, they don't have to dig in the southern Negev looking for oil. They already have it. It's in the Eastern Province of Saudi Arabia.
Jim worked at the refinery of those oil fields.
Right.
Yeah. And I mean, on the ancient maps, I see exactly that tribe was there.
Yes.
It's labeled by the French in the 1700s. I haven't made it. I just read what they have made.
Of course, you won't find that on the current day map.
And in modern maps, of course,
I wouldn't
nothing.
think Saudi Arabia would want that on there. No.
No.
They're pumping it out of the ground as fast as they can.
As fast as they can.
Yeah, but isn't that just fascinating that the evidence continues when you move into the Arabian Peninsula? And with that evidence comes a broad range of possible scenarios. Why is it coming out now? Why are these things so important? To what do we have to deal with now when faced with these things? I think Lennart does a magnificent job in the book of putting out a case just as it would be to a jury. And he is exactly right. Don't believe what we are sitting here telling you, that from times before or even now. Go to these things yourself. Get that book and have a look at it and see if these things are not as logical as we're saying they are.
Wow. Well, that's true. Some of the people who are saying, I don't believe what you're broadcasting, you jerk. Well, get the book and see if the jerk is right.
There you go.
I love that attitude.
That's right.
You don't care.
No.
They're going to call you what?
Yeah.
You don't care.
This is not popular, but truth normally isn't.
Well, it goes against what we've been taught.
Yeah. Of course.
And I struggled with that too.
As it is in science, I apply this. And the thing is that we don't stop science. We continue to develop all the time. And in science, we just look at the data. And the data speaks for itself.
I don't know how Tommy and I can thank you on behalf of the people who are going to tune into this.
We just want you to promise you will come back.
Will you come back sometime? Okay.
And much more.
Okay.
We have a lot more to bring as well.
They will have so much more when they come back. Thank you for being with us. Hope you enjoyed it as much as Al and I did. And thank you so much. Thank you.
It's our pleasure. Again.
All
Bless
of you
you.
for coming.
All three of you. See you again. This program is brought to you exclusively by the love gifts and offerings of our faithful partners. Thank you, partners.